We're fortunate to have with us a longtime patron of the Northside School District, a great teacher for Northside, a teacher here at Leon Valley, who, along with her husband, raised a fine family and is dedicated to education, Ellen Burns. Now, I'm Jack Jordan, I'm a former superintendent, and Ellen is here to share with us some of her experiences in Northside. And Ellen, why don't you give your name and just a little history about your relationship with Northside?
Well, I was hired to come to Northside to teach. I was supposed to teach at Lock Hill, but because my son was at Lock Hill, I felt like it would be wiser for me to come to Leon Valley. So I came to Leon Valley and was assigned to teach the 3rd grade. And that was in September of 1954. And I taught here for many, many years. And things were very much different when I came here than they are now. But I enjoyed every minute that I was here, and I enjoyed the children immensely.
In that first group of kids that you had, I think you said 50-something students?
We registered over 50 the first day because we always register ahead of time. We just registered the children at the first day of school. And that first day we registered over 50 children. Of course, some of them, by the time we took our class picture, had moved away and weren't in my class anymore. But for the whole year, I had at least 49 or 52 all the time. I had 49 right when the picture was taken, I think.
That's a little bit more than what the standard is today.
A little bit. I don't think I ever had what the standard is today, but 1 year while I was teaching here.
Ellen, you were born and educated where?
In Alabama. I was born in McKinsey, Alabama. Dad and Ira Griffin, and both my parents luckily got to go to college. But I don't know whether either one of them finished or not, but maybe they finished the junior college that they had at that time. And I don't believe there was another one available in that area. And the town that I was born in, McKinsey, was in Butler County, and that's in the south central part of Alabama.
And you graduated from?
I graduated from the University of Alabama in January of 1941. I didn't have enough money to go home every summer and every time there was a holiday, so I just stayed and took courses, so I finished early.
And your husband, who contributed greatly to Northside, where did you meet Bob, and where did he go to school?
Bob went to school at Auburn University. At that time, it was the Alabama Polytechnic Institute. And that's just in the central part of Alabama, just a little bit northeast of Birmingham, Alabama. And he finished in 1939 and went to work for Farm Security. And
you mentioned to me about his service in World War II. Tell us a little bit about that and what you were doing when you all got married. Tell a little bit about that.
When I met Bob, I had been teaching school in Alabama, and I taught for half a year, and I taught physics, chemistry, biology, and general home economics for $72 a month. So I was trying to find something that would pay a little more, so I applied to the Farm Security Administration to be a home supervisor. So when I went to Hamilton, Alabama to work for the Farm Security as a home supervisor, I didn't know it, but Bob was, the next morning, I saw this man on the street, and I said to this lady who was with me, I said, "There's the kind of man I'd like to marry." And she said, "Oh no, that's my boyfriend." And so I said, "Well, I'll just give you a run for your money." And the next morning I sat down at my desk, and right jammed up against the back of my desk was his desk. And that's how I met Bob, because he was working there in the same office that I was working in.
Somebody's looking over y'all.
I didn't know he would be there that morning.
And tell me about his service in World War II.
Well, Bob went into the service in March of 1941 or 2, I guess. March of 1941. And we had gotten married on the first, no, we didn't get married then, but he he didn't have to go overseas right at first because he was in training. And he stayed in Fayetteville, North Carolina and trained for a while, but when he came home the first time on furlough in August, we decided to get married because Bob said, you may not be here when I get back, so I better get you now. So we got married. And then Bob went overseas and was gone overseas until February of '45. And when he came back to go to OCS in 1943, the latter part of 1943, he had malaria, and he was really not very well. So he was going to OCS, so he went through OCS, and then when in February of 1945, I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to join him, and we lived there until the war was over.
Okay. OCS is Officer Candidate School. What brought you to San Antonio?
Well, after the war, right after the war, Bob was in a terrible, terrible accident, and he was injured very badly. And he was supposed to have gotten his job back. You know, all the boys that went to be in the service were to get their jobs back when they came back home from the service. So after Bob was able to, he felt like he was able to go to work again, he contacted our supervisor, who was with the Farm Security Administration, only to find out that they didn't have any more jobs. But they did tell him that there was a production manager's, milk production manager's job in San Antonio. So Bob said, well, he'd like to go out and see about it. So Bob came out here and contacted the man that would be doing the hiring, and was hired. And then he came back for me and Barry Joe. But I forgot to tell you that just before Bob was in that accident, Barry Joe was born in January of 1946. And so we came out here, and when we first came out here, we lived in a trailer, in a in a travel trailer, a large travel trailer, because there were no places to rent to live, because everybody was coming back had come back from the war and had taken up all the places. So we lived in that a while, and then we got an apartment out at Stinson Field, where those barracks had been made into apartments, and we lived there for a while.
And he was working for Foremost Dairy.
Yeah, Foremost Creamers.
Creamers.
Yes,
okay. I'm
sorry. And when he about that time, when we were living in the apartments out at Stinson Field, he decided that he couldn't have milk, and he was needing more milk. So I had saved every penny I could, so we had enough money to buy 40 cows. So we bought 40 cows, and we rented a dairy and rented all their equipment and everything on Zazzamara Street.
Wow.
And we had so many problems because the man who was renting us his equipment would take the equipment and then charge us for losing the equipment. So we decided we better find a place.
Break out on your own, huh?
Break out on our own. So we decided that was the thing to do. Bob said, well, if we're going to have to pay for all this stuff for somebody else, we might as well be paying for it for ourselves. So we went out and rented a place right where you enter Lackland on Heidi. It belonged to a Mr. McCord. And we took our 40 cows out there, and I watched after the dairy and looked after everything until Bob decided he better come home and help me. So he quit his job at Foremost and came home to start to dairy, and that was in 1949, I think.
And what brought you to Northside?
When we moved out on to Highway 90, that was in the Northside district. Well, the first thing that happened, they needed a teacher at Hoffman. So I applied for that and was going to teach at Hoffman, and they had all grades in one room. I didn't manage it, but I wanted to try it. But I found out that I was going to have Mikey, so I decided I better not start that big of a job. So I didn't. That's when we first got to Northside District, and we've been here ever since.
When did you start teaching at Leon Valley?
I started in September of 1954. And when I started teaching here, we had moved out on Houseman Road and rented a dairy there because it had a nicer house and was a larger dairy. And by that time, we had more cows. And Barry went to Lock Hill School, and then we finally bought a place we are now, and we've lived there ever since.
Right off Eckerd Road in Bandera, right?
Uh-huh. Right off of Eckerd Road, right behind Anderson's garage, down that street.
But tell us about some of the students that you had.
Oh my goodness, I don't know which one to say first. They were all so wonderful and such sweet children and well behaved. I don't think I ever had a discipline problem. It just never did. Everybody behaved and were just as sweet as they could be. But I can mention some of them. They were James Weingartner. And James Weingartner is a lawyer, and he's a minister, and he mainly takes cases for churches.
Wow.
And he has done that for several years, and he has 3 little girls. And another one I can mention is Gordon Alley. And he is in computer systems, and he's an analyst for computer systems here in town. And he's been with that ever since he finished college. And another one was the little Sandy, I don't know how you pronounce her last name. I called her Nugent. I don't know what it is, but I believe that's not the way you pronounce it. But she has a degree in software engineering, and she also has a master's degree in that. And now she and her husband, she met her husband when she was working for another company, but now they've gone into business for themselves, and they're doing really well. And another one were 2 little girls that that were so disadvantaged when they came from Mexico over here, but any children that would work that hard and learn that much in 1 year, it was just amazing to me. And their names were Angel Alonzo, and she's the personnel manager and works in human resources for Halo. And her sister is Vicky Alonzo, and she works with the Catholic ministry. But another one that I wanted to mention too was Carlton Steuben, because he was such a fine little boy. And one day we were taking exams, and he got the people that we had strangers helping us, and one of the strangers made him kind of nervous, but he went right on and worked, and he cried about it, but he went right on and did his test, and he just he did a really good job. The first one I thought of when I read your questions was Dean Kruger, and he was an educator, of course, and you know Dean very well. One day we were singing in the classroom. We were singing, "Have you ever been to Texas in the spring?" And we had sung it, and Dean said, "Let's sing that again." And so we sang it again. And he said, "You know, that just is so beautiful. I think I could just float off to heaven." And was Anita Waugh. She's her father's from India, and she is now a math teacher and teaching math in a junior college in California. And another one was Gretchen Kuhn, and Gretchen is she's a lawyer, and I think she's retired and is moving down to Port Aransas.
No.
And Ted Fogwell, he's now a doctor. And one day I always read Bible stories to my children from Egmire, because it wasn't any religion, it was just pure Bible, you know. And I read the story of Adam and Eve, and he was sitting there with his little hands on his desk, and his chin resting on his hands. And when I finished reading, he says, "Huh, that could be the story of any man's life." And another one was Lisa Bendley, and she's now a teacher. And I gave her a lot of my teaching material when she started teaching, but she was quite a little girl. And I could just go on and on and on.
Who were some of your principals that you worked with?
Well, I worked with, first I worked with Mr. Cody. And then I worked with Mr. Weaver, I believe.
That's correct.
Mr. Weaver. And then I worked with Mr. Banks.
Herman Banks.
Herman Banks, and Mr. Banks has passed away, and Mr. Weaver passed away while he was our principal. He got sick and did pass away while he was our principal. I mean, before he had to leave, of course. And the next one was Mr. Carson. And then there was Mr. Adair. And then there was Mr. Shoeback, I think.
Bill Shoeback.
And I just talked to Mr. Adair and Mr. Carson. Of course, I talked to him at the luncheon the other day, and I talked to Mr. Adair later because he called me. And I've talked to so many of my former pupils in the last few months. It's amazing how I've kept in touch with.
Tell us some other things about your family after you moved to Northside.
Well, after we moved out on Highway 90 and put our dairy out there, we had a little boy named Michael Keith. But Michael Keith didn't get to live very long because a man came to bring us some feed one day, and he went the wrong way and he ran over Mikey and he was killed at that time. And my other, Barry, I only had Michael and Barry at that time. And Barry went to Lock Hill School, and then he went to Sul Ross over at John Marshall campus.
Sul Ross at that time was a part of John Marshall.
John Marshall. It had the same campus.
That's right.
And then he graduated from John Marshall, and he went to Trinity University, and he majored in chemical engineering. And he was hired by Shell Chemical Company in Houston, which is a division of the Shell Oil Company. And while he was working there, he married Bonnie Moran, and they bought them a beautiful new home, and they were just doing really well up until July the 13th of 1973, and a drunk man ran into Barry and killed him, caused his death.
Well, Barry, of course, I taught.
I know.
And worked with, and I coached him, and he was one of the finest young men I've ever been around. He loved to do what you wanted him to, and it was just a pleasure to work with him. And we all had a great loss when Barry was killed. Oh,
I know what a loss it was to us, and of course I appreciate you saying those nice things about him, because I thought that was he was. Of course, I thought he was that kind of a boy. Barry got a scholarship to an academic and a basketball scholarship to Trinity, and then he went over to the University of Texas when he finished Trinity and got his master's in chemical engineering. And he did really well. The salary that he was making back in those days, you could hardly believe.
But tell us about your daughter.
Well, but Becky was born after we lost little Mikey, and Becky went to Redeemer Lutheran her first year, and then she came to Leon Valley and was here for the rest of her elementary years. Then she went to Pat Neff, and then of course over to John Marshall, and she was valedictorian when she finished Marshall. And she went to the University of Alabama in Birmingham to get her dental degree, and she got a DMD.
So, tell us some of the humorous things that you remember about the Leon Valley times and teaching here at Leon Valley.
The funniest thing that ever happened to me was about two little first graders. And I don't know if you want me to speak like they spoke or not, but anyway,
Why not?
Well, they were both cross-eyed, and they were both snaggletooth, and they both had red hair, and they had gobs of freckles. And one day they were marching out to recess, and the little boy stopped at the cookie machine that we had there at that time, and he put a nickel in, and he pulled the lever or whatever was there, and no cookies came out, and he just kept going on. And so this little fella came along, the one that I described, and pulled the thing and got the cookies. So I said to him, well, now, you know those are not your cookies, so you must bring that little boy a nickel tomorrow, because at that time they were a nickel. And so when they came the next morning, I saw this little boy walking around. He had a little rose, and it was in some aluminum foil. And he was walking around holding the rose, and I saw him, and I thought, well, now that's the little boy, because I would know him anywhere. And I went up to him, and I said, did you bring a nickel for the other child? And he said, Tita, I told you that wasn't me, my brother. I said, no, you didn't tell me anything about a brother. He said, well, it was my brother. And I said, well, you go get your brother and let me see him. So he went to get his brother, and he came with his brother, and there were two just exactly alike. And I said, my goodness alive, you knew it was you all the time. And he reached in his pocket, and he got a nickel, and he put it out like that. And I said, well, you knew it was you all the time. Why did you do that? He said, well, Tita, it's just like this. We just look so much alike that we get each other mixed up.
We get each other mixed up.
And one day, I had to go to the principal's office for just a minute, so I asked, I didn't say anything to the children. I just said, I have to be out for just a minute, but I'll be right back. Well, when I came back, the room was in turmoil, so I just sat down at my desk. And I said, well, if this is the way you act when I'm not here, just go ahead. You've got the full day in front of you. You can just do whatever you want, because as long as you don't interrupt the other classes. And little Jane Findling was sitting back there, and everything got just as quiet. You could hear a pin drop. And after a while, she said, oh, Ms. Burns, don't let us do as we please. I feel like I'll fly off into thin air, which just goes to show you that children like discipline of a certain kind. I always felt like that I had to be firm with them, but reasonable.
No question about it that you were a good teacher, a great influence on youngsters' life, but they do want discipline.
They do.
And you had to discipline your life, because you talked about moving cows. My guess is that Bob moved those cows.
Do you know when we moved from Houseman Road over to where we live now? We milked the cows over on Houseman Road in the morning. And Bob moved, I think we had about 200 then. And Bob moved all those cows, all the dairying equipment, and set it up in the new barn and got it operating, and we milked the cows over here that night. He drove the cows on foot.
On foot, yeah. Herded them over.
Just herded them over here. I wanted to tell you another thing about a little boy. I guess this is all right, but it was so cute the way he did it. His name was Sam. I tried to think of his last name, but I don't remember. One day he was reading this story about Mr. Jefferson. It was in one of our readers, and he was a milkman. And he was reading it along, and he said, Mr. Jefferson came up to the door, and he said, hell? 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 Yes, Sam, but the low is on the other side on the other page. It was so funny the way that child said
Turn that page.
Yeah. One day, little Wernli we were having our spelling test, and Gordon Alley had either been sitting on his foot and was getting off, or he was standing up to sit on his foot. But anyway, he stood up, and I said, Gordon, don't look at Sandra's paper. Little Sandra Yarber was sitting in front of him. And he looked at me and he said, I beg your pardon, Mrs. Burns. I was not looking at Sandra's paper. I know how to spell every word. I thought that was, and I said, that's right, Gordon, don't let anybody ever accuse you wrong.
Well, that family had interesting roots in Leon Valley.
Oh, didn't they? I had forgotten the name of it.
Tell about any other areas that you'd like to speak to, some of your relationships with your principals and maybe board members. I know Dr. Burke was lived in this area as kids went to school?
Yes, he was our veterinarian.
Right.
Yes, he was our veterinarian.
Now, you started off teaching for a princely son back in those days, which was interesting. What, if you had to do all over again with teacher?
Oh, I would. Bob said I would have taught school for nothing, and I think I would have. I enjoyed every minute I was ever at school. And no matter how bad things were on the dairy or whether it was dry and we were about to not make a crop or something, Bob wasn't going to make a crop or something, I could come to school and forget all about it. But if I had had the faith that Bob had, I guess I wouldn't have worried about it in the first place, because Bob said no matter how bad things got, he'd always say, well, just wait till God and I get over in that back field. We'll work it out.
Your family carried through on a great tradition in Northside of dairying and farming to support dairies, but also your relationship with education in Northside School District and Leon Valley is just something for history to record.
Well, can you imagine a school district that when I first, that just hardly had gotten started when I came into the district. In fact, when I came to Leon Valley, we had no PE teachers, no music teachers, no art teachers. We only had 6 teachers, and Mr. Cody was the principal, and he had to teach. It wasn't until Mr. Carson came that principal didn't have to teach 6th grade, you know. And our accountants, I never shall forget them. The drinking fountain we had was out in the on the playground, and it was just a long tube, a long pipe with hose bored in it, and the one would turn on the water, and about 4 or 5 could drink. And we didn't have very much playground or ground equipment, but PTA did an awful lot for us. I tell you, if it hadn't been for our PTA, I don't know what we'd done. And some of our parents, I tell you, the parents were just, they worked at school, they just tried to do everything in the world to make money for us, you know, because we just were getting started. The whole school district was working to get us ahead, you know.
Is that?
Oh, I just went to see Mrs. Sawyer. Saturday was a week ago. She will be 100 next March, and one of the finest women I think I ever knew, and a wonderful speech teacher. But and she came to work with us late in life, you know. I don't know how old she was, but she became a speech teacher, I'm sorry, late in life, and retired. I don't know what year she retired, but about the time that I did, I think, or maybe a little before. And I went to see her the other day, and I wanted to bring her to the luncheon, but she said she just had trouble walking, and she felt like she couldn't go. But she was did so much, and she was our first PTA president.
Is that right?
She was our first PTA president.
One of the first interviews we did was with Tom Sawyer and his mother.
Oh, sure enough. Yes. Oh, with her.
Yes.
Oh, I'd be so anxious to see that.
Well, we'll work that out. Yes. Ms. Burns, anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, all I can say is that I just had the most wonderful experience of teaching in Northside District, and all my principals and all the PTA workers and all the other teachers. It was marvelous to be in a situation that you enjoyed so much, and that other people helped you along so much in it. And I just thought the other day, if I were able, I'd just still like to teach again.
I bet you could. I bet you could. Well, we thank you for taking time out to come and share these experiences with us.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I just hope
You've done beautifully.
I gave you something.
Certainly did.